This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China, Japan and South Korea hit back at U.S. steel and aluminium tariffs, taking effect today. Tokyo's pushback, a 700% rice levy, angers Washington. Now, Beijing's set to host three-way talks with Moscow and Tehran on Friday, right after a UN Security Council meeting on Tehran's escalating uranium stockpile. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is en route to The Hague, where he will stand trial for his deadly war on drugs. His family is fighting to have him sent back to Manila. Pakistani forces launch a full-scale operation to rescue train passengers held hostage by militants in the southwest. More than 150 of them have been freed in the past 24 hours. Also in East Asia tonight, tech and AI taking center stage at the just concluded two sessions in Beijing. We ask an expert how China's DeepSeek and Manus is challenging U.S. dominance in the industry. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump's new tariffs on steel and aluminium stirring reactions from East Asia. The 25% duties, which took effect today, apply to all countries with no exemptions. Well, China has vowed to take all necessary measures to safeguard its interests. The Foreign Ministry criticized the tariffs as a violation of WTO rules, stating protectionism offers no way out and warning that trade wars have no winners. China is also the only country facing tariffs on steel and aluminium higher than 25%. A 20% blanket tariff on Chinese imports was already in place before today, meaning steel and aluminium from China are now subject to a total tariff rate of 45%. Now, the tariff battle is also impacting businesses. A source cited by a state media-affiliated social media account says Chinese authorities recently held discussions with Walmart after reports that the U.S. retailer had pressured its Chinese suppliers to cut prices in response to the tariffs. Now, the account claimed that Walmart's demand may violate commercial contracts. Elsewhere, Japan has called Mr. Trump's decision to impose tariffs regrettable, saying the lack of an exemption could impact economic ties with the U.S. Now, Tokyo had requested to be excluded from the tariffs earlier this week, but that was declined by Washington. South Korea, one of the biggest suppliers of steel to the U.S., is also pushing back. The country's trade minister is set to visit Washington to address concerns after Mr. Trump singled out Seoul for allegedly imposing higher tariffs, 4 times than that of the U.S. Seoul has disputed this claim, arguing that its effective tariff rate on U.S. imports is significantly lower than Mr. Trump suggests. Now, imports from East Asia are a crucial part of U.S. supply chains. While China exports little steel to the U.S., South Korea is one of the largest suppliers of both steel and aluminium. Japan as well remains a key steel exporter, making the latest tariffs a significant blow to trade relations in the region. Right, for more on this, we are joined now by CNA's Michio Ishida in Tokyo. Michio, Japan has called its non-exclusion from the levies regrettable. How else do you think Tokyo will likely respond?
Well, Otelli, there's actually no indication of whether Japan might take any action at this point in time. Now, the Ishiba government did try to discourage the U.S. from imposing 25% tariffs on Japanese steel and aluminum. And Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry Yoji Muto was deployed to Washington this week. He had his first face-to-face meeting with U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick and the U.S. Trade Representative. Mr. Muto told reporters he conveyed to his counterparts Japan should not be a target of U.S. tariffs, while the U.S. side explained to Mr. Muto the purpose of the tariffs was to revive the U.S. manufacturing sector and to secure jobs. No assurance was received on exempting Japan from tariffs, but they did agree to continue to talk on a win-win solution for Japan and the U.S. But looking at the bigger picture, Japan's exports of steel products to the U.S. is only about 3% of its total steel exports. Japanese steelmakers have increased the steel production in the U.S. And as to aluminum exports to the U.S., the volume is small, or just 2 tons out of the 16.6 million tons Japan produces. Most are consumed domestically. So there are views the impact of the tariffs is unlikely to be huge. Now, during the Biden administration, U.S. set a no-tariff policy towards Japanese steel imports of up to 1.25 million tons. And according to Japan's finance ministry, in 2024, Japan exported 1.12 million tons to the U.S. It was the world's 6th biggest exporter of steel to the U.S. So from zero tariff to 25%, that will have some impact to Japan's steel industry.
Michio, meantime, Washington, they've also slammed Tokyo for imposing tariffs on rice imports to Japan. What do we know about that?
Yes, well, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, she named Japan for slapping 700% tariffs on rice imports from the U.S. But based on the World Trade Organization's minimum access agreement, Japan does not impose tariffs. That's for rice up to 770,000 tons as of 2023. No tariffs. And Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi explained tariffs on rice imports beyond the minimum access is 341 yen per kilogram, or about $2.30. So it's not simply 700% tariffs, as Ms. Leavitt said. Now, for a bigger picture, Japan's average tariffs on U.S. imports is 3.9% as of 2022. And U.S. tariffs on Japan imports is on the average 1.58%. U.S. trade deficit with Japan is about $100 billion. So for Mr. Trump, this does not sit well. He would call this unfair. But Japan is the biggest foreign investor for the U.S., which Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has stressed when he met with Mr. Trump in February. He also announced huge investments ahead of net giant SoftBank, Isuzu Motors plans. And most lately, Mr. Trump mentioned Honda's big plans in the U.S., but they have not prompted Mr. Trump's administration from making Japan an exemption from its steel and aluminum tariffs. So this is the situation between the two countries at this point in time. Mr. Ishiba has been saying it's important to keep on explaining to the U.S. about bilateral relations.
Oh, many thanks for your insights there. CNA's Michio Ishida reporting to us live from Tokyo. Now, outside the region, the European Union has hit back, imposing its own counter tariffs on U.S. goods from next month. The European Commission said in a statement that it would move forward with, quote, swift and proportionate measures. Well, the EU says the retaliatory levies will target $28 billion worth of U.S. goods. It will also suspend rebalancing measures introduced in 2018 and 2020, replacing them with new ones instead, which will be imposed in 2 steps from April. However, the door for dialogue remains open, with the EU President Ursula von der Leyen saying that she has asked the bloc's trade commissioner to resume talks with the US to explore better solutions. Meanwhile, Australia has ruled out imposing reciprocal tariffs on the US, although markets in Sydney have been feeling the pressure for a month now. Washington has rejected an Australian bid to be exempt from 25% steel and aluminium duties.
Tariffs and escalating trade tensions are a form of economic self-harm and a recipe for slower growth and higher inflation. They are paid by the consumers. This is why Australia will not be imposing reciprocal tariffs on the United States. Such a course of action would only push up prices for Australian consumers and increase inflation.
Oh, the unpredictability of the tariffs has been weighing on confidence and the U.S. own markets. All 3 major indices gave up their gains and performed underwater over the past month. China will host Russia and Iran on Friday to discuss Tehran's nuclear program. A Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Ma Zhaoxu will chair the meeting in Beijing with his Russian and Iranian counterparts in attendance. Well, the officials will exchange views on issues concerning Iran's nuclear program and other areas of mutual interest. Friday's talks come after a closed-door gathering of the United Nations Security Council in New York, scheduled today. Delegates are expected to discuss Tehran's growing stockpile of near bomb-grade uranium. Beyond the nuclear issue, ties between Iran and Russia have deepened since the start of the Ukraine war in 2022. The two signed strategic cooperation treaties back in January, and both have good relations with China. The three countries are taking part in the annual Maritime Security Belt exercise in the Gulf of Oman. Well, this marks the fifth year that they have participated in these naval drills. The joint exercise follows a period of rising tensions with the U.S., although Tehran says an Arab country will soon deliver a letter from Donald Trump. And for more, Dasha Chernyshova joins us live now from Moscow. Dasha, first up, what can we expect from this upcoming trilateral nuclear talks? And basically, what's Russia's stance on Iran's nuclear program?
Well, certainly the understanding is that the sides will be exchanging the views on the peaceful resolution of the situation surrounding Iran's nuclear program. The Russian position in general has been that this issue should be resolved peacefully through the negotiations, and Moscow has been stressing that Iran is a sovereign country that is capable of defining its foreign policy objectives on its own. And we also understand that the Russian officials have all been saying that the restoration of Iran's of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in the way it was agreed upon years ago should be in the way it was agreed upon. So certainly what Moscow is saying, there should be no additional strings attached. And the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has recently been saying that Moscow does feel some concerns regarding the pressure from the United States that there should be political issues attached to the restoration of this deal. Lavrov has said that Iran there have been proposals for Iran to have the checks that would be supporting that Iran is not supporting groups in Iraq, in Libya, in Lebanon, in Syria or elsewhere in the region. And Moscow says that in this context, it is absolutely unacceptable for all the countries in the region to have the say except for Iran. So what Russia is saying is that the situation where we are now at the moment requires special attention. But what Moscow says is that there have to be negotiations that will be taking into account Iranian concerns, but also will be held on the equal basis with the mutual respect. And this is something that Moscow will be trying to bring to the table, to these negotiations and to other talks that will involve other countries, including those from the European Union and the United States.
Well, Dasha, I also want to talk about those naval drills that China, Russia, and Iran, they've been holding it together. Why do you think Russia appears to be moving closer to both Iran and China?
Well, keep in mind, those drills are taking place for the fifth year in a row, and that's already significant that these three countries are doing that on the regular basis. Marine Security Belt 2025 aims at, according to the officials, cooperating the work of the naval forces of the participating countries. What they are trying to do is to make sure that the three countries have good cooperation. They have been simulating the attack of the maritime drones and how they are repelling those attacks. But obviously, the main idea here is to show to the world that these three countries do have this special bond. For Russia, it is paramount to show that Russia has good relationship with Iran. The signing of the deepening of strategic ties between these two countries deal was already a significant improvement. But obviously, for the rest of the world, there has to be the message sent from Moscow and Tehran that they do stand together, especially in the face of the Western pressure and sanctions, because Russia has become the most sanctioned country in the world. Iran was previously such. Also, China here is an important player. Russia has been improving its relationship with China further and further, deepening those ties and showing to the world that they have the special privileged partnership. So certainly the very idea is to show to the world that they do stand together, including militarily.
Many thanks for that report. Dasha Chernyshova speaking to us live from Moscow. Now, the plane carrying former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has taken off from Dubai and is now on its final stretch to the Netherlands. Now, Mr. Duterte is bound for The Hague after he was arrested on a warrant issued by the International Criminal Court linked to his war on drugs. A flight tracking website, Flight Radar 24, shows that the former leader's jet faced a delay in Dubai for a number of hours, but has now departed. It was scheduled to make a refueling stop. Philippine news agency ABS-CBN reported that Mr. Duterte also received medical attention during the layover. The ICC is investigating the former leader for crimes against humanity for his deadly crackdown on drug syndicates, which rights activists say killed tens of thousands of people. Back in Manila, Mr. Duterte's lawyers say they have filed a Supreme Court petition on behalf of his youngest daughter, Veronica. It accuses the Philippine government of kidnapping and demands authorities to bring Mr. Duterte back. Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte, another daughter of the ex-leader, says that she is bound for the Netherlands without providing further details. And for more, Will Denslow joins us live now from Brussels. Will, when exactly will Mr. Duterte arrive in Rotterdam, and what's going to happen to him next?
Well, after that reported delay, these flight tracking services suggest that his plane is due to land in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, at just after 5 p.m. local time. It's 16 GMT, or just after that. Now, we understand that after that, he will be sent to an ICC detention unit. Now, that is a part of the Dutch prison system. We believe there are several other inmates, both for the ICC as well as the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Now, we understand a few details about what that lodging, what that detention centre really looks like. It's believed that detainees have their own individual cells. It's equipped with a television as well as a computer, but those computers do not have access to the internet. This is purely for use for things like preparing for upcoming trials and for their cases. There is also a shared kitchen as well for these detainees. Now, when it comes to what happens next for Mr. Duterte, well, I've heard from an ICC spokesperson who says that once in custody, the initial appearance hearing will be scheduled. Now, according to the ICC, that will be scheduled promptly on arrival. Now, this is a pre-hearing, and essentially what this will consist of is it'll mean that Mr. Duterte will have his identification checked to make sure that is all squared away, and he will be read out the charges that he faces. Then a proper hearing will be faced for the judges to determine whether there's enough evidence to move forward.
Right, and but Mr. Duterte, I mean, he has vowed to fight the arrest. Walk us through some of the legal implications for his case at the ICC.
That's absolutely right. And of course, you mention those legal challenges that have been presented in the Philippines and questions over the ICC validity, considering the fact that the Philippines pulled out of the ICC and the Rome Statute back in 2019. That is why this court's charges are only looking at a period from 2011 to 2019, to the date that the Philippines actually pulled out of the ICC. So according to the ICC, they are certainly still valid to go forward. But of course, that will be hotly contested by Rodrigo Duterte's legal representatives at these upcoming hearings and motions that we can expect in the coming days and weeks. And there's also, of course, the health implications to consider. He is set to be 80 years old, so that is something, another factor that will certainly be played upon, likely by Mr. Duterte's lawyers. But of course, we won't have further information until the ICC do in fact have him in custody.
Well, thanks so very much for that report. Will Denslow speaking to us live from Brussels. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, major Japanese firms give a nod to substantial wage hikes for a third consecutive year. Plus, Chinese officials question Walmart executives for reportedly asking Chinese suppliers to swallow the tariff hikes imposed by the Trump administration. Hello again. Glad to have your company on East Asia tonight. Roland Lim is standing by with the very latest in business news. Now, Roland, China, EU, they have vowed to strike back, defend their economic interests against all that sweeping new U.S. steel and aluminium tariffs. So there are concerns now of an all-out trade war, which are rattling investors. How true is that?
Well, definitely. Those concerns on investors' minds, as well as the on-off nature of President Trump's trade policies, that has fueled uncertainties in the market. But the equity benchmarks in the region, well, it's managed to close with gains today. That's after U.S. President played down fears of a recession. Reports that Ukraine would accept a U.S. proposal for a ceasefire with Russia also eased the risk-off mood. Japan's Nikkei 225 closing 0.07% higher after seesawing between gains and losses throughout the day. South Korean shares also closing 1.4% higher as chip makers jumped on growing hopes of the industry bottoming out. Let's check in on Korean metal companies. POSCO and Hyundai Steel, remember, lost ground yesterday. It's a contrasting picture at the end of the trading day today. POSCO Holdings, the firm, is reportedly considering building a steel plant in the U.S. to weather the upcoming tax. It closed up nearly 6% higher. Hyundai Steel up 2.5% and Tehran Steel 0.5% in the green. Stocks in China and Hong Kong fell, pressured by consumer and tech shares as investors locked in profits from recent rallies while evaluating the impact of U.S. tariffs. The latest trading session comes amid further tariff announcements overnight. The U.S. president defended his use of tariffs when he met corporate leaders, many of whose companies' stocks have been hit hard by souring sentiment. Now, he told CEOs of major firms that the new levies would go higher than 25% without specifying which tariffs. And as concerns linger about the economic impact of a trade war, the U.S. president played down fear, saying that he doesn't see a recession coming and also dismissing a steady run of losses on Wall Street. Japan's biggest companies have announced bullish pay increases, seeking to help workers cope with inflation and to retain staff amid labor shortages. Now, every spring, unions and management participate in discussions known as shunto to establish monthly salaries before Japan's fiscal year begins in April. Most of the member organizations reportedly achieved a raise nearly as large as the previous years, which was the highest since 1999. Record corporate profits, helped by a weak yen, also supported the case for lifting pay this year. Renko, that's Japan's largest labor union umbrella group with more than 7 million members, said last week its unions were seeking an average hike of 6.09%. And that's up from 5.85% last year and marks the first time in 32 years that more than 6% had been pursued. Broad-based pay increases are also seen as a prerequisite for the Bank of Japan to continue to hike its policy rate from still a very low level of 0.5%. The ongoing wave of wage increases comes amid rising inflation, pushing inflation-adjusted real wage growth to around zero. China has summoned Walmart executives to Beijing to express its concerns after the U.S. retailer reportedly urged its mainland suppliers to absorb increased American tariffs. Now, this marks the latest salvo in the trade spat between the world's two biggest economies. A post on the Weibo account of state broadcaster CCTV says that Walmart's demand would potentially break the supply chain, disrupt the normal market, and harm both Chinese and U.S. companies, as well as American consumers. Now, Walmart has reportedly asked some suppliers for major price reductions to insulate American consumers from higher levies on Chinese goods. But Chinese exporters are resisting because margins are already razor thin. The Weibo post says that if Walmart insists on the price cuts, more actions would be taken. It warns that any demand on suppliers, if true, would be bad for Walmart's operations and developments in China. Remember, Walmart has some 280 outlets and around 50 wholesale stores in China with sales of $17 billion in its 2024 financial year. The development comes amid concerns that American companies will get caught in the crossfire as US-China trade tensions escalate. And that is the latest business. I'll be back in a little bit long.
All right, chat more a little later, Roland. Thank you for that. Coming up on East Asia tonight, China set to rattle the AI scene again, this time with an artificial intelligence agent designed to carry out complex tasks on behalf of the user. And some hostages reportedly released from a hijacked train in Pakistan, but more captives remain. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. U.S. President Donald Trump's steel and aluminium tariffs go into effect, triggering reactions. China vowed to safeguard its interests, while Japan says it regrets that it was not exempted. Iran says it's due to receive a letter from U.S. President Donald Trump, who has called for striking a nuclear deal with Tehran. The Islamic Republic confirmed it will hold talks this week with China and Russia on its nuclear program. And a plane carrying former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is bound for The Hague after he was arrested on a warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for his deadly war on drugs. China is embracing artificial intelligence as it seeks to challenge U.S. dominance in the industry that's worth more than $240 billion this year. Well, tech, and particularly AI, has dominated China's 2 sessions this year, the country's most important annual meetings of its top legislature and political advisory bodies that concluded yesterday. Beijing reportedly plans to invest about $1.4 trillion over the next 15 years amid intensifying competition with Washington over advanced technology. Manus, a powerful new AI tool released last week, is making waves in China amid hopes that it could replicate the success of DeepSeek that has rattled the global tech industry. The AI agent is designed to carry out more complex tasks, from screening resumes to conducting research on real estate and help in analyzing stocks as well. Local media reports say Butterfly Effect, the firm behind the AI, has raised more than $10 million in financing. Now, for more, let's bring in Yiran Chen, Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Duke University. Well, Professor Chen, thank you so very much for joining us in East Asia tonight. So first we had DeepSeek. We're very impressed with that. And now we have Manus. As we've mentioned, users say, it can clean up your resume, create itineraries, even help with stock tips. So, Prof, you have used Manus. Give us some insights on what you think of the app, and how do you think these capabilities, as incredible as they sound, how will they reshape white-collar industries?
Okay, it's a very interesting question. If I look at the DeepSeek and also the Manus, there are 2 different types of the AI apps. The DeepSeek is something we call the foundational AI model that will be trained for performing some particular task. And for the Manus, that we call the AI agent, that'll be autonomous, the tools that will combine, the multiple tasks and try to perform a more complex task. You can consider the Manus as the weapons of many complicated, the tasks, which will combine them together to perform something you just talked about, like resumes or booking, reservations, such and such. I tried both. I will say that the Manus is something called the half-finished product, because now they're under the internal task, but not commercialized yet.
And I guess the concern is that, people are afraid that their jobs, right, white-collar jobs will be taken over by the incredible function of such AI agents such as Manus, whether it's in a healthcare or technological industry. Do you think that's a concern?
It is, actually. Yeah, we have been observing this trend in the past couple of years. These AI models or AI apps, try to replace some jobs and, more importantly, try to improve the efficiency of many jobs. For example, we have seen the increase of the efficiency of code programming by about 40% in the last couple of years, simply because people deploy something called a co-pilot that's powered by these AI models. And that's going to cause, the demand decline in the entry-level programmers. And we'll see, such trend in the following years. So it is.
Right. So other concerns, I mean, besides white-collar jobs, possibly being at stake, there are also concerns around data privacy, security, regulatory compliance, all that sort of issues that sort of influence the adoption of these different large language models. So, Professor, how do you think how is it going to impact markets like in China and the US? Are they going to see who is behind, who are the makers of these large language models before deciding usage, which is dependent on our privacy?
Yeah, like many other competition between China and the US, it is a big concern for the data privacy and also who can own those data, such and such. Let me give you one example. The DeepSeek, when DeepSeek was released, they did not really talk about too much about this data privacy because the original goal of DeepSeek is trying to reduce, the cost. And they did not put much effort on data privacy until, the tool became so popular. And then the owners of this tool trying to implement those features on it. It's just one example to show this. And you just mentioned, the privacy, the safety of those tools will continue to be the concern, and also urge, the different governments trying to implement, different policies, to protect those data, and also, the use of those tools. So that basically means that, they're going to control their data, make sure the data will not be able to leak, to the competitors or some other uncontrolled region, and also train their models locally to make sure, they are not be able to worry too much about this. Yeah. So.
Right. Also, help us understand. I mean, we've got DeepSeek, we've got Manus, they're making waves. What does this mean in terms of the U.S. position in the global AI race? And when do you see China catching up to the U.S.?
It's also a very good question. The DeepSeek is something we call the open source model. That basically means that, the development of this model is based on, something already being released in the public domain. And they try to optimize, what they already have, to improve the existing or state-of-the-art, the models. So open source is actually a very popular format, for the global development community to try to develop different models. It's against another types of model we call the closed, the source model, which are like, the ChatGPT or any other models owned by the big companies. So open source, has completely reshaped the computation of, the different countries or different companies, because people are trying to release these models, open it, and people can use this open code, to optimize their own models. But DeepSeek is just one of the most successful examples we have seen so far. I mean, from China.
Sure.
So how that people going to? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just actually wanted to bring in a soundbite, actually, because China right now, they're pushing ahead in AI. We heard in the 2 sessions, their economic ambitions remain in focus. And the UN actually said that Beijing's 2025 growth target of 5% is driven by 5 critical areas. So let's just listen in to this first.
How do we create a new workforce where we reskill them, bring them the new skills that we need? Because today, there are 5 things that will define the momentum for the way forward. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, semiconductors, fintech, biotech will define progress across the world. How do we embrace these technologies and make them a social good? Make sure that people who have been affected by the jobs that it may take over are able to transition onto new jobs.
So, Professor, as China, and not just China, other nations as well, I mean, they're rushing to adopt all these emerging technologies, right? I mean, is there a real danger that all of these advancements, it's going to widen the inequality gap, leaving millions behind in the race for innovation? Because not everyone has those equal opportunities.
It has always been the concern. We call it democracy of the AI models, because if there are some, the nations that have dominated this technology, they certainly will have some privilege in this competition. Yeah, and actually one of the reasons for DeepSeek, became so successful because the DeepSeek, using the technology to reduce the dependency on the computing power. That is actually one of the reasons the China government, try to promote the DeepSeek because it can mitigate the dependency of the GPUs.
All right, really enjoyed that conversation with you. Thank you so very much for your time and thoughts, Iran Chen, Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering, Duke University. Now, in other news, rescuers are racing against time to free dozens of people held hostage by armed separatist militants on board a hijacked train in Balochistan province of Pakistan. The Baloch Liberation Army has claimed responsibility for yesterday's assault. They blew up a railway track before opening fire on the passenger train, which is carrying more than 400 people. 155 captives have been freed in the past 24 hours, but it is unclear how many hostages are still being held. The BLA has been demanding the release of Baloch political prisoners, activists and missing persons that they claim have been abducted by the military. Authorities have around a day left to meet their demands, failing which the militant group threatened to execute the hostages. A full-scale operation is underway to rescue the passengers, but authorities say they are being cautious, for there are suicide bombers alongside women and children captives. Now, the Jaffa Express train was traveling from Quetta, the provincial capital of Balochistan, before being ambushed. The mineral-rich region is home to Beijing's investments, including a network of highways connecting the two countries, which are mostly under construction. The CPEC is integral to China's wider Belt and Road Initiative, with Beijing investing some $65 billion in the region. Julie Yu tells us more about the Baloch Liberation Army, one of the strongest insurgent groups operating along Pakistan's border with Afghanistan and Iran.
The Pakistani authorities, as well as the U.S., UK, EU, China and Iran, have designated it as a terrorist organization. They claim to be freedom fighters pushing for the independence of Balochistan, a resource-rich province located in southwestern Pakistan. In recent months, the BLA have stepped up their attacks, targeting infrastructure, as well as Pakistan's military and Chinese interests in the country. The group has accused Beijing of exploiting the province's natural resources and has targeted assaults on Chinese citizens working in the region. In 2018, 4 Chinese nationals were killed in an attack on Beijing's consulate in Karachi. And in 2022, the group deployed female suicide bombers for an attack on Chinese nationals at a university in Karachi. While in March last year, they launched a series of attacks. The Pakistan's Gwadar port in Balochistan, which is built with Chinese help, was targeted. A militant stormed Pakistan's largest naval base, citing Chinese investment in the region as their motive. The Chinese engineers working on a Beijing-funded hydropower project in the country's north were also killed. Now, Beijing has stepped up pressure in Islamabad to take action against the militants responsible for these deadly attacks. Balochistan is part of China's $65 billion investment into the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is part of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Islamabad has accused India and Afghanistan of backing the BLA to damage Pakistan's relations with China. China has labeled the violence in Balochistan unacceptable, saying it threatens their investment in the region.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, Cathay Pacific Airways manages to eke out marginal profit growth for last year amid intensifying competition. Hello again. As promised, we've got more business news now with Roland Lim. And Roland, I want to talk about China's EV sales. Apparently, they're feeling the heat from higher US and EU tariffs.
Right, Otelli. China's domestic market appears to be making up for the loss in overseas sales. Now, China continues driving global EV sales despite higher EU and US tariffs. Global sales of battery-powered EVs and hybrids jumped to 1.2 million units in the month of February. That's 50% more than last year. About 3/4 of those took place in China, where purchases soared 87% from a year ago. Some researchers say the figure was distorted by the timing of the Chinese New Year holidays. Remember, the EU imposed tariffs on made-in-China cars at the end of last October after an anti-subsidy probe. The US and Canada also introduced a 100% tariff on Chinese-made EVs, while US President Donald Trump threatened to impose more. Research firm Row Motion says that sales of MG, owned by China's SAIC, was hit the hardest by tariffs. Now, sales of Honda, which produces some battery electric models of the Dongfeng Honda brand in China, alongside Mercedes, Geely, Tesla, Renault's Dacia Spring, as well as smaller Chinese brands NIO and Xpeng, were also impacted. BYD, however, is gaining ground in Europe and increasing its market share worldwide despite the tariffs. Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, ICBC, has launched an ambitious $11 billion fund to support the country's private economy and tech innovation. Now, focused on hard technology, the fund will target sectors like semiconductors and advanced manufacturing, moving away from traditional internet services. ICBC's fund is in line with China's major policy priorities outlined at the annual parliamentary meeting to spur consumption and achieve tech breakthroughs amid geopolitical tensions between China and the US. Now, ICBC emphasized the bank's dedication to executing government directives into real-world action. Now, the focus will be on long-term patient capital rather than seeking quick profits. Remember, last week, China's state planner said that it'll set up a government-backed fund that would mobilize some $138 billion from social capital to support tech startups. Now, TSMC is proposing a deal to operate Intel's factories. The contract chip maker is reportedly in early talks with a number of American semiconductor firms to participate in the joint venture. Now, this is after US President Trump asked the Taiwanese firm to help turn around the industrial icon as part of his drive to revive American manufacturing. Now, TSMC approached chip designer NVIDIA as well as semiconductor firms AMD, Broadcom, and Qualcomm. Under the proposal, the chip-making giant would run Intel's foundry division, which makes chips adapted to customers' specifications. In return, it'll get a stake, but not more than 50% of the company. That's as the Trump administration doesn't want Intel to be fully foreign-owned. Now, Intel shares have lost more than half of their value in the last year, and they turned in a loss of close to $19 billion for 2024, and that's its first since 1986. Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific reported a marginal rise in its net profit after announcing earlier this year that its flights were finally back to pre-pandemic levels. Now, this marks a second consecutive year of improving performance and comes on the back of a stronger second half due to a holiday season boost in travel demand as well as lower fuel prices. For the year ended December, Hong Kong's flagship carrier posted a 1% rise in net profit to around $1.3 billion. Revenue for the year jumped 10.5% to more than $13 billion. Now, the carrier's profit included a one-off gain of $74 million from a dilution of its interests in Air China and Air China Cargo. Elevated cargo demand and higher cost efficiencies helped boost the bottom lines. Looking ahead, management says that trade conflicts could pose risks to its cargo business. And after a years-long manpower crunch, Cathay says it plans to boost staff numbers by up to 4,000. It also aims to increase air travel and cargo capacity, starting with the addition of more than 100 new and fuel-efficient aircrafts to its fleet. The company declared a second interim dividend of 49 Hong Kong cents per share. And Cathay Pacific shares closed down 1.8% after jumping almost 4% to their highest level since May of 2019 after the results were announced. And that's it for business. Back to you, Telly.
Ukraine has backed a U.S. proposed 30-day ceasefire and agreed to engage in talks to end its 3-year war with Russia. In turn, Washington has agreed to resume military assistance and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. Now, both were suspended to pressure Ukraine to come to the negotiating table. These developments follow ministerial-level talks between both sides in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. It was the first high-level meeting between the U.S. and Ukraine since the White House blow-up between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky last month. Mr. Zelensky has called the U.S. proposal positive, saying the ceasefire would cover not just the air and sea, but the front line as well. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the proposal would now be taken to Moscow for its consideration.
We're going to take the offer to them. We're going to tell them this is what's on the table. Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking. And now it'll be up to them to say yes or no. I hope they're going to say yes. And if they do, then I think we made great progress. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here.
President Trump said he hoped Moscow would agree to the ceasefire proposal, adding U.S. officials would meet with the Russians as early as today. He added that Mr. Zelensky would be invited back to the White House after the two clashed in the Oval Office without signing a minerals deal.
I think it's a big difference between the last visit you saw at the Oval Office and this. So that's a total ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed to it, and hopefully Russia will agree to it. We're going to meet with them later on today and tomorrow, and hopefully we'll be able to wipe out a deal. But I think the ceasefire is very important. If we can get Russia to do it, that'll be great. If we can't, we just keep going on and people are going to get killed, lots of people.
In a joint statement with the U.S., Ukraine said that Europe would be involved in the peace process. French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed the progress and called on European and NATO military chiefs to draw up a plan to define credible security guarantees for Kyiv. Now, NATO chief Mark Rutte said that he was cautiously optimistic, calling it an important step, and he thanked President Trump for his leadership in breaking the deadlock. And that's East Asia Tonight this Wednesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Look us up as well on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.